May 25th, 1996. The sun had just set on the central coast of California. On the quiet campus of Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, the weekend had just begun. College students were preparing for summer, planning road trips, beach days, and lazy afternoons under the sun. But for one 19-year-old freshman, the weekend would end in silence. Kristin Smart was tall, striking, and full of ambition. A communications major with dreams of traveling the world, she had only just begun to shape her future. But that night, after attending a campus party just a few blocks from her dorm, Kristin vanished without a trace. No one knew it yet, but this wasn't just a missing persons case. It was the beginning of a dark story, one full of missteps, secrets, and the lingering shadow of a suspect who, for years, managed to live freely while her family waited and hoped. This is the story of a girl who went missing in plain sight. A story that haunted a campus, baffled investigators, and revealed how sometimes the truth takes decades to come out of the dark. Kristin Denise Smart was born on February 20th, 1977, in Augsburg, Germany. Her father, Stan Smart, was working as a teacher on a military base, and the family, tight-knit, loving, and faith-driven, moved frequently during those early years. But it was in Stockton, California, where they would finally settle and call home. Growing up, Kristin was the kind of person you noticed, tall, athletic, and full of life. But more than her height, what truly set her apart was her energy. She was charismatic, confident, and often the kind of person others gravitated toward. Friends remember her as free-spirited, someone who loved dancing, music, and expressing herself through photography and writing. She had big dreams. Kristin wanted to travel the world, to tell stories that mattered. She was passionate about human connection and intrigued by cultures different from her own. That curiosity led her to become an exchange student in Venezuela during high school. It was a defining moment. She came back changed, more mature, more focused, and more driven to make an impact in the world. Kristin's parents, Stan and Denise, encouraged her ambitions. They knew their daughter had a spark, something rare. She enrolled at California Polytechnic State University, or Cal Poly, in San Luis Obispo, in the fall of 1995. She was just 18, starting her first year and majoring in communications. A fitting choice for someone so articulate and empathetic. But like many college freshmen, Kristin's transition wasn't perfect. The excitement of independence was met with moments of loneliness. She missed home, especially her younger siblings, and sometimes felt isolated. Still, she was determined to find her footing. She joined campus groups, met new people, and tried to build her own circle of friends in a town that was still unfamiliar. She kept in touch with her parents, often writing heartfelt letters and making long-distance phone calls. In her journal, she reflected deeply on her hopes, her future, and her place in the world. Kristin was in the middle of becoming who she was meant to be. But then, on one long holiday weekend in May 1996, that bright future suddenly stopped. She vanished. No trace. No goodbye. Just gone. And the mystery of what happened next would haunt her family and an entire campus for decades. It was Friday, May 24th, 1996, Memorial Day weekend at Cal Poly. For most students, it meant a long break from classes, a chance to relax, party, or head home. But Kristin stayed on campus. Earlier that evening, she called a friend, asking about plans for the night. She wanted to go out, meet people, dance. Eventually, Kristin heard about a small, off-campus birthday party on Crandall Way. It wasn't a huge party, maybe 10 to 15 people, mostly students. Nothing wild, but for Kristin, it was something to do. She left her dorm without taking her purse, keys, or even money. That alone was unusual, but it didn't raise alarms at the time. She wore black shorts and a gray t-shirt, her long blonde hair pulled back. She seemed excited to get out and have fun, like any college student on a Friday night. Kristin arrived at the party alone, sometime around 10:30 p.m. Witnesses said she had a couple of drinks, just enough to be buzzed, maybe more. At one point, she called a friend and left a message, her voice upbeat but slightly slurred. She talked about meeting new people, enjoying the night. There was laughter in her voice, no hint of what would follow. Around 2 a.m., the party started to wind down. Kristin was seen lying on the lawn outside, apparently intoxicated, barely able to stand on her own. That's when three fellow students, Tim Davis, Cheryl Anderson, and Paul Flores, offered to help her back to her dorm. Tim left first, saying goodbye as they walked. Then Cheryl left Kristin with Paul when they got close to their dorms. Paul told her he'd walk Kristin the rest of the way. It was only a short distance from there. But Kristin never made it home. She vanished sometime between leaving that party and the short walk back to her dorm room, barely 100 yards from where she was last seen. No screams, no signs of struggle. No one reported hearing anything unusual that night. The next morning, her roommate noticed Kristin's bed hadn't been slept in. But it wasn't until Sunday that someone finally called campus police. By then, nearly 48 hours had passed since Kristin was last seen. And in missing person investigations, those first hours are everything. But no one treated it like a crisis. At first, the university assumed Kristin had just gone away for the weekend. After all, it was a holiday. Students were known to travel, visit friends, even disappear for a day or two. But Kristin's parents knew something was wrong. She wasn't the type to just vanish, not without telling someone, not without checking in. They began calling the school, asking questions, urging them to take action. But the school didn't. Kristin Smart was officially listed as missing 3 days later, and by then, crucial time and evidence had already slipped away. When Kristin Smart was officially declared missing, the first person investigators turned to was the last person who reportedly saw her alive, Paul Flores. At the time, Paul was a fellow freshman at Cal Poly, known as quiet, awkward, even a bit of a loner. He had a reputation among some students for making others feel uncomfortable, especially women. Nothing ever proven, nothing that stood out until now. When police first spoke to Paul, he said he walked Kristin back near her dorm and then watched her go the rest of the way alone. He claimed he turned and walked to his own dorm room, alone. A simple story, but investigators quickly noticed holes. For one, Paul had a black eye when they questioned him, a visible bruise on his face. He claimed he got it while playing basketball, but when pressed, his story changed. First it was basketball, then bumping into a car, then later he said he didn't know how it happened. Too many versions, too many contradictions. Police also noted his behavior: nervous, evasive, avoiding eye contact. He refused to take a polygraph, refused a second interview without a lawyer. His dorm room was searched, but it was days too late. By then, the room had been cleaned for summer break. There was no body, no weapon, no witness. Still, suspicion began to grow. Investigators believed Paul Flores knew more than he was saying. But proving it? That was another story. The Smart family, devastated and frustrated, began their own search. Kristin's parents, Stan and Denise Smart, put up missing posters across the county. They reached out to media, hired private investigators, pushed law enforcement to act faster. But weeks turned into months, and months into years. Despite intense suspicion, Paul Flores was never arrested. He moved on, transferred schools, lived a quiet life under the radar as Kristin's case faded from national headlines. But her family never gave up. They held marches, created a website, spoke to anyone who would listen. And in the shadows, Paul Flores stayed silent. But silence doesn't mean peace, and nearly 2 decades later, that silence would finally start to crack. Years passed. New students came and went at Cal Poly. Kristin's name faded from most people's memories, but not from her family's, not from the detectives still quietly working the case, and definitely not from the growing online community of true crime followers who kept asking the same question. What happened to Kristin Smart? Then, in the 2010s, nearly 2 decades after Kristin disappeared, things began to shift. A retired FBI agent named Terry Black offered his help to the Smart family. He believed Paul Flores was hiding something, and he wasn't the only one. At the same time, a man named Chris Lambert, a local musician and podcaster, launched an audio documentary called Your Own Backyard. The podcast focused solely on Kristin's case. It was quiet, haunting, and deeply personal. Each episode pulled in thousands of listeners, then millions. It brought fresh attention to Kristin's story, and suddenly new witnesses came forward. People who had stayed silent for years. Women began speaking out, alleging that Paul Flores had a pattern of predatory behavior. Several claimed he had assaulted or harassed them. Some stories dated back to high school. The picture of Paul Flores became darker. In 2020, investigators took a bold step. They searched Paul's San Pedro home, where he was now living with his parents. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Soil was dug up. Evidence was collected. They also used ground-penetrating radar in the backyard of his father's house, and what they found shocked them. The technology detected an anomaly under the deck, something that looked like a human-sized disturbance in the soil. According to reports, a cadaver dog had also reacted strongly at the same spot. No remains were recovered, but it was enough. On April 13, 2021, after 25 years, Paul Flores was arrested and charged with the murder of Kristin Smart. His father, Ruben Flores, was also arrested, accused of helping cover up the crime and hide Kristin's body. The news sent shockwaves across the country. For many, it felt like the beginning of long overdue justice. But one question still lingered. Where is Kristin? In October 2022, the long-awaited trial of Paul Flores began. It was surreal. After more than 2 decades of silence, the courtroom doors finally opened to the public. Reporters filled the benches. Kristin's family sat quietly, just feet away from the man they believed had taken their daughter's life. Paul Flores, now middle-aged, appeared older, heavier, but still mostly silent. The prosecution opened with a powerful statement. This is a case about a predator. Someone who preyed on a vulnerable, intoxicated young woman. Someone who used silence and time to bury a secret. They painted a timeline, detailed, methodical, based on testimony, expert analysis, and years of re-examined evidence. Witnesses described the party on the night of May 24, 1996, and how Kristin was last seen walking away, supported by Paul. Several women testified about Paul's behavior, how he made them uncomfortable, how he was known for lurking, staring, touching without consent. But the most damning testimony came from forensic experts. During the search of Ruben Flores' backyard, investigators had discovered discoloration in the soil, along with disturbed sediment layers. Forensic archaeologists explained to the jury that this was consistent with a grave that had been dug, filled, and later emptied. In other words, Kristin's body may have been there, and then moved. Even more chilling, the dirt contained traces of human blood, degraded over time, but still detectable. Though no body was found, prosecutors argued that the totality of the evidence, the last person to see Kristin alive, his history of sexual violence, the forensic clues, and the behavior of his father, pointed to a planned and covered-up crime. Paul's defense, on the other hand, was thin. They argued that Kristin had simply gone missing, that no one could prove what happened, and that decades of delay had tainted the evidence. They claimed Paul had been unfairly painted as a monster. But even without a body, even after all those years, the jury listened carefully. They saw the faces of women who had come forward. They watched the Smart family still grieving. They examined the soil reports, the audio recordings, the inconsistencies in Paul's story. And in October 2022, the jury returned their verdict: guilty. Paul Flores was convicted of first-degree murder in the disappearance and death of Kristin Smart. His father, Ruben, was acquitted. The jury wasn't convinced he played a provable role in concealing the body, despite the evidence. Kristin's parents, sitting in the courtroom, held back tears. It wasn't everything. There was still no body, no final resting place. But after 26 years, it was something. A piece of justice, a voice for Kristin, and a message to every family still waiting for answers. Even when it takes a generation, the truth can still find its way out of the dark. Kristin Smart was 19 years old. She loved swimming, photography, and the ocean. She called her parents often, sometimes just to say goodnight. She dreamed of traveling the world, helping people, maybe becoming a teacher. She was bold, a little goofy, and full of light. But in a single moment, all of that was taken away. What happened to Kristin could have remained another unsolved mystery, another missing person case fading into cold archives. But it didn't, because her family refused to let it go. Her parents, Stan and Denise Smart, made it their life's mission to keep her name alive. They spoke to media, pushed for new legislation, and worked with private investigators when the system stalled. They created the Kristin Smart Campus Security Act, a California law that requires universities to coordinate with local law enforcement on all cases involving serious crimes. Her disappearance didn't just leave a wound. It created change. Kristin's case also reshaped how missing person cases are treated. It reminded the world that just because someone is in college doesn't mean they're safe. And just because someone seems normal doesn't mean they're incapable of horrific things. And even though her body has never been recovered, her story has moved millions. People who never knew her began to care. Podcasts were made, billboards were raised, a community formed around a girl they'd never met. Just because something about her story felt familiar, felt close, felt like it could have been anyone's daughter, sister, or friend. Paul Flores sits in prison now, and while that may never bring full peace, it brings closure. But there's still one thing left unfinished. Kristin's family has made one final public plea. Tell us where she is. Let us bring her home. It's a reminder that even in justice, there is grief, that sometimes justice is only partial, but also that hope can endure through time, through silence, through decades of not knowing. Kristin Smart is more than a victim. She is a voice, a legacy, a name that still echoes, not just in the halls of Cal Poly, but in the hearts of every person who hears her story and refuses to look away. Pause. Rain continues gently. May she one day be found. May her family find peace. And may we never forget her name, Kristin Denise Smart,